Welcome back, folks. We're back with Ray Pillar and Jim Treleaven at Pillar's Principles. Today, we've already killed off all the what do you got to do to start your business or questions to ask, start your business. So now we're going to talk about your business is running, but it's stuck. The first question is, why is it stuck? So, Ray, why do most businesses get stuck?
Well, let's define stuck.
Go for it.
I would assume that most people would say that stuck would mean that there's no growth. And just like your life, if you're not growing, you're probably dead. So
exclusive, my friend, mutually exclusive. You're either alive or you're dead
because you grew too much, but that's another
different topic. So let's go back to
sure. So let's define what stuck is, and that would probably be at least non-growth from monetarily, client-wise, or what other, and no plans to correct it at least. So that at least, Jim, is that the way you would define being stuck?
Yes, I would say for sure. And this happens to companies all over the place where they're either not growing or they might even be shrinking a little bit. Profitability has been affected. And the culture is kind of, nobody's excited about the business, if that makes sense.
And then, of course, there are how should I say, things that can make a company not grow that are out of your control, like pandemics.
Yes.
Or even things that are local. Maybe a new company has moved in. It's has competitive ideas against your company, so that would cause you not to grow, at least temporarily.
So
I think that's a good. Well, go ahead, Fred. I think that's a good segue to your next question.
Well, so what I hear is that a black swan event, pandemic, airstrike, earthquake, something like that happens, and you have to recover.
Yes.
Competition comes in. Okay. One thing that popped into my head, and this is when I want to drill into a bit more detail, is you've literally reached the limits of your potential client base. As a franchisee, you have territory. So literally you could have maximum penetration of your client base, your territory, and be stuck, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So we got 3 topics there that I'd like to drill into.
Yeah.
Give an example of a company you've seen that has been hit by that, we'll say the black swan event, and either the example should either be where they failed to survive the ugly or the bad, or what they did to survive to get past it. Which one of you wants to go first?
Well, I think the quick food industry was really hit hard during the pandemic. But at the same time, you saw a lot of them folding, but then quite a few were surviving as well. So what I think is it'd be a good idea to try to find out why they survived.
Right.
Jim, do you have any insight on that?
I don't have a good franchise example, but I'll give you an example. And it's in the software industry where a very large software company had not been growing for 10 years and was bleeding seriously. And the opportunity for their customers were very large companies, American Express, Prudential, Citicorp, that were basically running their business with this company's software. But it was really old software. And a bunch of, and this is the new entrants case that you guys mentioned, a lot of new entrants into the space with much newer technology. Okay. So the companies that they were serving, like, are we going to throw these guys out, or what are we going to do? So the question was, the growth challenge in this case was the lots of competition out there, not any really large companies that would be available to sell new business. So here's the clue, which would work in some cases for franchises as well, is let's sell more to each customer. And so the solution there was, and it's the ERP business where there are lots of consulting firms that make a lot of money off companies like SAP. But there weren't companies doing this, but this company, which was originally much larger than all those companies, started to do internal services businesses like Accenture, and added that product to the business line, which could be sold into the existing customer base, and got back to growth.
Oh.
The other issue there was the tech issue, which may be relevant for the audience or not, but those companies had very modern software, fancy interfaces and all that. And this company had character-based stuff that you see on TV and old movies. And they were sort of trying to build a competitive product themselves, which we stopped, which is how we got back to profitability. But the solution was so simple, was to put basically a browser front end on this very powerful, solid software. It looked modern instantly, and everybody was happy. It cost almost nothing to do. So, you know,
Wow.
It went on to do very well. It got back on the growth path with the one strategy and maintained the customers with the other one.
So it sounds like if I understood that right, they did two things. One, they updated one way or another their current product offering.
Right.
And two, they built basically new services that they could sell into the existing customer base.
Right.
All right.
Exactly.
So and so in that they were getting their lunch handed to them by their competition, they came up with new offerings and said, we'll help you with this. We'll be more helpful effectively. And by the way, here's our new version, Windows Vista. Sorry.
Looks very fancy.
Oh, could have thought of a better one.
Windows Bob. Yeah.
Oh, that's even better.
But you know, it was they were in tough position, and then went on to thrive and actually became the basis for one of the largest companies out there in the market now.
So so that also kind of answers that third. So there's the black swan, there's the competition, and then there's the you've already maximized your current penetration into your audience, your client base. So literally the answer to that one is figure out what else to sell them.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the piece I think that's relevant for franchises as well.
Okay. So, all right. If we figured out that this is one of those things of why somebody's business is growing, are there any other reasons? I mean, those are three things that I would say are kind of external factors. What internal factors will keep companies from growing?
A lot of things, actually.
The top three.
Okay, I'll give you number one, and I'll give an example again. A company that was actually publicly traded, fairly good sized company with very large supply chain software to very large customers, Home Depot, Boeing, GM, Chrysler. And the issue for this company was virtually all internal. The culture was to view the customers as an annoyance to be ignored or gotten rid of as soon as possible. And you can't do that with those big companies. And they were doing it. So the culture had gotten pretty bad. It was completely internal. And they neglected the product too, which was actually caused by that same internal issue. They were not being responsive to the customers. And so the trick there was change the culture. And the company had been shrinking and was losing money hand over fist, of course.
I knew you were going to come to the C word, Ray's favorite word.
Which one?
C, culture.
Culture.
Yeah, it is. And it, it clearly was the case. Now, what I would have thought, having gone in there and not knowing where the men's room is in a week and having to make a bunch of changes, is that cultures are generally difficult to change. Now, it turns out, and we can talk about the change process in a lot of detail, but I couldn't figure out. We had to reduce the size of the company by 40% to survive, and because you're public, you don't have ready access. In the market at the time, you didn't have ready access to capital. So, and it had 2 months, so had to reduce it. And all the expenses in a software company are people, so it was a 40% reduction in the sales, in the size of the employee base. Now, that has all the earmarks of making the culture worse because the people that are left behind have issues, and then with fewer people, how can you serve the customers better who are already angry? So I was going to say something else, but anyway, now it turns out, not knowing, turning that challenge over to a small group of employees, somebody from every department, a frontline engineer, frontline salesperson, a frontline support person, and the management team, and say, we got 2 seconds to figure this out. Let's do it. And believe it or not, same people that have been part of that culture came up with a brilliant plan, because we said the goal is we got to get the customers happy. And they, the plan was basically to take one senior person, very senior person in the company who understood the product, understood the supply chain process, and had some knowledge of the customers, and said, okay, Fred, you are responsible for General Motors. Ray, you are responsible for Boeing. Susan, you're responsible for Home Depot. And they are then empowered to make whatever changes possible, is necessary, to make those customers happy. And I was stunned at how the culture changed. And then we did some discussions about culture and how the customers were important, but
empowering is powerful.
So important. Oh God, made all the difference in the world. And it turned around, got back to growth and profitability, and did very well.
So
with less people.
In many years of interviewing people with Ray, the C word has been used quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
What you just kind of described is something I've heard Ray preach about for years. So Ray, you've continued to grow. And is it because of the culture?
Well, I want to when Jim was talking, I wanted to cite an example of a vendor that we've used for probably about 10 years, and every time we would call the vendor because we were having a problem with the product, it was, okay, what's your name, what's your address, what's your first child, and and then that information was passed on to another person who basically asked you the same information, and then that was passed on to someone who says, okay, what's the problem? Well, I'll have to pass that on to tier 2 or tier 3. And it's like,
Yep.
So
we've
we
all experienced
switch to a different vendor, and a couple of weeks after we switched, I get a letter saying that company I was originally with is going into Chapter 11. So,
you were not surprised.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So it just doesn't take much to care about your customer or your client.
It doesn't.
In our case, when a client calls, the customer representatives immediately see their screen on their computer. because it's up to the phone. So if they call from the same phone they originally called from, boom, their screen pops up. Hello, Mrs. Smith. You know, how was your clean 2 days ago? Is everything okay?
Yep.
And you know, that's the way we take care of the customer, not asking them 40 questions about who they are.
So tying this back into what Jim said, and because both of you have cited customer service as being the issue. And I saw some, I don't know.
Virtually always is.
So in other words, one of the reasons companies get stuck is, I won't say the only reason, but one of the reasons they get stuck is a lack of caring about the customer. A culture that doesn't care about the customer. Okay, so let's assume that the culture does care about the customer. So it's not that. What other reasons would limit growth?
Well, you mentioned saturation.
Right.
That could be a possibility.
I think that's a very common one outside of culture.
Yeah.
Is the only way to get past saturation coming up with a different or better widget?
In the case of what Jim mentioned, and yes, I think that definitely they came up with some new ideas on their existing product, which enticed the existing customers, existing base. Yes,
that's right. Or more widgets is the second one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so either improve the current one or diversify the product offering.
Bingo.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So we've dealt with the Black Swan event. We've dealt with the constrained audience. What other reasons might there be why a company's stuck?
Price.
Yeah.
Competition is lowering their price, and that's something that you need to find out quickly.
So if it's price, that seems to indicate so what I always told is you never want to compete on price, because then you're a commodity. And if you're a commodity, you're not going to keep people a long time, because they're always going to go to the cheapest price. Right. So,
well,
not always, but more often than not.
Yeah. Well, there's within reason. I mean, we're not going to lower our prices down to what you're going to pay your neighbor to do the same work.
Right.
Because
you just need to make sure the value is commensurate.
Yeah. So there is value in what we're charging.
So in other words, you need to if on this topic, if you're losing customers on price, it sounds like the issue is you're not communicating the value you're bringing.
That could be, yes.
Yeah. And it might not be more than a communication issue, but communication.
Yeah. You did not set their expectations.
Right.
Are there any other reasons why a company can be stuck?
Issues with
their
directors,
product service.
Yeah.
So
external, for example, if a company is largely owned by, let's pick on private equity firms, and I've seen an example of a company that could have been fixed, but the private equity firm was just, I still can't figure out what they were thinking, but the private equity firm had other stuff to do, or they thought it would be too hard to fix or something. So they just killed the company. It's a pretty big company too.
Okay.
So it could be those kinds of things as well.
So you stumbled into where I was going with this. I
knew what you were thinking. I'm sorry.
Most people don't know everything I'm thinking, otherwise they'd be freaked out. But so I was going for leadership there, because I know that they say that companies will grow so far, but sometimes the founder, CEO, whatever, is the one that's in the way, because they can't get out of their own way. They've got to they micromanage, or they they don't hand off what they should to other people. So how does what it sounds easy to say, hand it off to other folks, but what would you tell that business owner who says, I've gotten so far, I know we can go more, the product's good, the pricing's decent, there aren't any black swan events. How do I get out of my own way?
I have sort of an example that actually it's a software one, of course, but most people will recognize this one. So in the late 80s, early 90s, Bill Gates, who everybody knows, founder of Microsoft, was by the sort of the board. I'm sort of surprised by this, but he was always sort of portrayed as the nerdy guy and all this stuff. And that was really not an accurate picture. But Microsoft was under attack, and this maybe is another good example, but under attack in the US courts and in the European courts for antitrust, being the only operating system out there. It's amazing that DOS could be the one considered to be so dominant, but in any case, it turns, so there was a lot of pressure on the company for sure. And the board kind of felt that, Bill Gates, the really competent nerd, would need some help. So they went out and found a COO. The first one they picked, pretty senior guy, who was the CIO of Boeing. He lasted about 6 months. And then they picked another one, someone I know actually. Went to my alma mater, but he was the chief marketing officer at Procter & Gamble, the sort of preeminent marketing company in the world.
Yeah.
He looked the part, didn't look like Bill Gates, tall guy, gray hair, suits, all that stuff, like right out of Central Casting. His name is Bob Herbold. That's public information. So anyway, so he went in, and I wasn't in all the meetings or anything, but he was able to support Bill Gates, not supplant him. He actually supported him. They got through it all. And we now know where Microsoft is, which has done really well. And Bob Herbold was there for a while. Now, the really interesting contrast was we have Gates, who was portrayed as a nerd, was actually, at the end of the day, and Herbold supported it, a pretty damn good manager. And Herbold was too. But Herbold actually, and no one knew this. I mean, if you talk to people today, no one knows it, has a PhD in computer engineering.
Oh. That's interesting.
So it was enough for him to know, which is my favorite saying in this case, is he may not at that point have been able to write any code or design any computers, but he knew enough to know when they were bullshitting him.
That's interesting.
A very key skill.
Yeah.
All right. You brought something up, and it keyed something, something I heard in the news, I think actually on the radio today, which I want to go into about antitrust. But Ray, you want to chime in on this past question?
Who is the biggest mail order company today?
Amazon?
Yes.
Yep.
Who started it all? Mail order houses.
Oh, yeah. Sears.
Where is Sears today?
Gone.
Yeah.
What happened?
That's
all I'm going to say. I don't know.
I know. Actually, it's a long story, but Sears is actually an example of mismanagement at the top. They could have survived, but and Sears and Kmart together, and it's a long story, but yeah, that's a really good example, Ray.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to flip back to the news. I heard on the news today that I don't know if they were found guilty or the government is going after Google for antitrust. Break Google up. Any comments? Any thoughts? Just on that topic, breaking Google up.
Well, I'll start. You can finish, Ray. But my thought is particular, I mean, the current FTC has been overly aggressive in antitrust. So I think that's the biggest issue. But the next issue is in the technology industry, it is so dynamic. New entrants can come in so quickly that the traditional concept of monopolies and all that kind of stuff does not apply. It might be hard to take, partly because they're no longer a technology company, but it might be hard to sort of take over Amazon. But that's mostly because of the infrastructure and all the other stuff they've built that's not technology per se. But anyway, so I think it's in general, this is true for Google as well. The government's knowledge of those markets is naturally limited. And I went through that once. We were doing an acquisition. And yes, the law is Hart-Scott-Rodino is the law, which says if an acquisition is of a certain size and potentially is of a certain size component of an entire market, then that acquisition requires approval of several government agencies. The FTC is one of them, and the Commerce Department. Those are the two big ones. So I fly off to Washington, D.C. to explain, and the market actually was computer graphics, which was so rapidly changing at the time. So we're trying to explain to these very, well-educated, smart, well-meaning, not bad people at the FTC and the Department of Commerce, what all this stuff was. And we might as well have been speaking Greek to the dog. I mean, it's not their fault, but them making market decisions in markets that, they don't understand, and actually people in it don't understand it totally. Those markets are so dynamic that the concept of the sort of traditional 1930s definition or Standard Oil and all that is very antiquated. So they need to tread very lightly. Mostly all they can do is damage. And it's, the individuals doing it, I said they're well-meaning, but it's impossible to understand. It's impossible for people in the market to really understand it. But
it appears to me like Google is getting into more and more, like Nest Doorbell, I think they just acquired not too long ago. Well, that's great, but I think this type of lawsuit will help them reflect on what their core product is.
Sure, that's a very good point.
And they're not. But the only thing I can hope for is if they do take over a company like that, and I'm using that product, that it would be better. But apparently not so, at least not with the doorbell system.
Remains to be seen, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think that's my only comment on that. Really, it does help. It will help Google or companies like that to kind of reflect on what they're.
That's a very good point. I like that.
Okay. I have
a little bit of a natural distrust of government bureaucracies, but that's okay. I mean, it's not the individuals. Like I said, they were smart, well-meaning people, but and then the next day they're going to be talking about some other, industry that's equally complex and totally different. So,
and what are the scariest words known to man? I'm from the government, and I'm
here to help.
So
scarier is I'm here from the government. I'm here to screw you over. Which if they're breaking up Google.
That's a given. And honestly, I think Google is, with their AI offerings over the last 6-8 months, I think they're doing more to screw themselves up than the government.
And I was going to mention that, the AI stuff too. So,
all right. So just as a quote soundbite, what's the last piece of advice you're going to give to somebody who's got a small business and who's stuck? Jim, let
I would say
Ray have that.
I would say the first thing is, if you follow the stuff we've been talking about, there's almost no business that cannot be fixed.
Okay.
There are certainly going to be exceptions, but I think, it's the glass half full, not the glass half empty.
Mhm.
If you follow a good plan, and analyze where you are and figure out what can address it, you'll be fine.
Okay. Ray, your last thoughts.
So the C word, start taking a look at
Good
your
one.
culture. Many people think, well, I've got everything set and I'm just going to, float along. But if you don't dive in once in a while and take a look and see, maybe something has changed that you're not aware of.
Yeah.
So you need to get in there once in a while and just take a look and see what's going on.
Yep.
Excellent, gentlemen. Thank you. So we'll be back again next week, folks, with another episode of Pillars Principles, and we'll continue the discussion of how to grow your business now that you've got one. Have a great week, folks.